Bonsoir à tous, goedenavond iedereen en welkom voor deze eerste lezing van het seizoen, waarvoor A+ en Beaux-Arts het genoegen hebben Paola Viganò uit te nodigen, die vanavond in discussie gaat met Philippe van Parijs over het concept van de horizontale métropole. Le concept de la métropole horizontale qui est apparu maintenant il y a plusieurs années et qui a depuis été étudié et développé dans de nombreux contextes, dont la Chine, la Belgique, la Suisse ou encore l'Italie. C'était également le sujet de l'exposition qui a eu lieu ici au Palais des Beaux-Arts du 14 juin au 26 août dernier. Veel langer ga ik vanavond niet zijn, omdat ik voor de introductie van deze lezing graag het woord geef aan Leo van Broek, onze Vlaamse bouwmeester. Maar eerst bedank ik graag Beaux-Arts voor de co-productie van dit evenement en onze waardevolle sponsors en partners. Onze structurele partner Febelsem, Athénor, de structurele sponsor van de lezing, mais aussi la ville de Bruxelles, de Vlaamse overheid, la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles et la région Bruxelles-Capitale. Bonne conférence.
Good evening, everybody. I was asked to do my short 10-minute introduction in English. As most of you know, the concept of horizontal metropolis, as far as I'm concerned, does not exist. Because a metropolis, as I know and like it, are cities like Manhattan and the big cities, Buenos Aires, Frankfurt, Tokyo. And they are not horizontal. They have an horizontal impact. They have suburbs and they have a cloud of sprawl around them. And the sprawl is a horizontal part. But that's not metropolitan life anymore. The problem in Flanders is that we have horizontality without metropolitan life. At least 65% of the people in Belgium or in Flanders, in detail, don't live in a village, don't live in a small city, don't live in a big city, don't live in our capital, but live in the middle of nowhere, where they cost in amount of money, and we have a study that's on its way. Vito is making it, will be ready in a few months. Like in infrastructure, a suburban house in Flanders costs 20 times more to the government than a house in a center. So horizontality is eating our public spending to a disaster that is enormously. The traffic jam and all the other disadvantages will cost probably our country 30 billion per year. Horizontality eats nature. 2 weeks ago I discovered a shocking number, that is the weight of the vertebrate biomass. So all the living creatures who have a skeleton, birds, land animals, people, that's the total weight, is the vertebrate biomass. 65% of the vertebrate biomass is our cattle. Goats, sheep, porks, cows. 32% of the vertebrate biomass is mankind. Together that's 97%. Vertebrate animals in nature is only 3%. We are everywhere. Our horizontality is a disease. And the idea that the concept of a horizontal metropolis could be developed and designed in a way that we could live in a harmonious relationship with nature has never been proven in our history. Things did not start to go wrong with the last century of economics. Things did not start to go wrong with the Industrial Revolution. There is proof, many studies have proven that from the moment that mankind, 10,000 of years ago, stopped being nomad hunters, that every time that we created a sedentary community, there was always the extinction of the macrofauna, of the larger animals. And today you see no bears and wolves in Europe, almost none. There is one wolf in Belgium and it was killed by a car. We are incompatible with animals that have our size and our spatial needs. We will always eradicate them. That's why we were, mankind and our cattle, 10,000 years ago, were 0%, 1% of the vertebrate biomass, and today 97%. The vertebrate biomass was mainly made by large macrofauna that we eradicate with our presence. So our horizontality kills our quality, gives us polluted air with all the transport needs that we have, kills our nature. So I believe in a new kind of horizontality, and that's where we meet. If we would coagulate the cloud that Flanders is, which cannot become a metropolis, to a multi-central horizontal network of condensed Micro-centralities that become compact, a bigger village, that's a micro-city. Smaller towns, bigger towns, and one or two almost metropolitan things like Antwerp, Ghent, and certainly Brussels. Then it is a horizontal network of condensed centralities with a lot less stops, so to make our public transport finally efficient, with a lot more room for pedestrians and bicycles. We both dream about cities that work without cars, so we have a lot in common in a certain target. Thanks to Paola's research, we know where we are today. We don't have dictators. You cannot start to do deportation of sprawl tomorrow. We have to work from what we are and have today. So knowing what we are today and what we have today, without approving, so I would invite Paola to insert techniques, we also are working on them, to unsprawl the problematic part of the sprawl. There is sprawl like low density tissue near a train station. There you should densify that kind of sprawl because it's well located. And it is a kind of infrastructure that you can keep. So also selective, taking away what we need, slow, maybe give people transferable developable rights that they don't lose their savings, that they only have to leave houses that are already so worn down that renovating them is just as expensive as building something new on a better location. Maybe this slow, we know that in Flanders 1% of all the built-up patrimony is replaced every year. So in 60 years we can replace 60% of our wrongly located buildings without hurting anybody. And it will make a lot of money because we spend fortunes on roads, infrastructure, inefficient transport, traffic jams. And there is this famous radio voice on the Radio 1 in the morning, and I think many husbands and wives have a longer contact with Jan Houtekiet than with their own partner. Because we are stuck. Cars today, the factories are making commercials that they say that from your car, in the jam, you can start to do your emails by speech technology. So the jam will be the ideal working moment because nobody can disturb you and you can work. It's very perverse how all the negative effects of what we did in the past are used to sell us more junk and to destroy more ecosystems. So it's an invitation to use that, I think, very interesting research on what horizontality today is. And there is a second interpretation of horizontality that I like a lot, that is being on the same level in opportunities. There is a lot of inequality caused by our economics, by our market systems that destroy not only the economy, also agriculture is destroyed. Agriculture is not making any money anymore. Food is worthless. It was 50% of a family budget. Today is less than 5%. Holland is the biggest export of agricultural products in the world, on some products, on many, to be honest. And 60% of their surface, even 65%, is used for agriculture, and it brings only 1% of the GDP, the national product. So we are exploiting our land with oversized agriculture. We need a new agriculture, and also on that we both agree that the values that drive our society are wrong. 2 days ago, I was happy to announce together with Vlaams Architectuur Instituut the re-edition of Het Lelijkste Land ter Wereld, the ugliest country of the world, by Renaat Braam. 50 years ago, he wrote and predicted all the problems we have today. Economy is polluting, creating waste. Our air, our food, our agriculture will go to waste. We will be in traffic jams. The car will be our boss. It will be a status symbol that we buy, and we will go and live in nature, and that will destroy nature. So the challenges are on the table. I will not participate in the debate today, but I'm inviting the participants to show us ways to correct what is not working and to see what we can keep and make it better. Thank you.
With this introduction, you understand that it will be, the following part will be also interesting. And this has been one of the interesting part of the work that we have made, thanks to A+, thanks to Beaux-Arts, on the horizontal metropolis, to create a moment of discussion, also in some cases quite harsh confrontation. But at the end, in fact, I think there is a common goal. How can we imagine a project for the city? And the horizontal metropolis has to do with this. So, what is the horizontal metropolis? For the moment, maybe in the future it will be something different. It's a radical project for the contemporary urban condition. I've written a text. For this reason, I wanted to communicate with Philippe Van Parijs. As you have seen, is a discussion with him. So I wanted Philippe to have the time to enter into the topics. And that's why I will go through this text in order to have a proper discussion later. So the Horizontal Metropolis is the output of a long-term design research on concrete territories, on their qualities and potentialities. It is also a vision constructed on a novel conceptual frame whose crucial terms are isotropy, porosity, and horizontality. In respect to the mainstream debate and transformations of the city, it is a counter project with an important theoretical tradition. This is just a part of this important theoretical tradition. The research addresses the possibility of a project for the new extended urban condition. The work we have carried out over the last 30 years builds up a conceptual metaphorical trilogy, which has been the ground base of a deep research work. The conceptual trilogy has been built up throughout the time in different spatial contexts, developing a strong, I think, coherence of themes and connections. You see the trilogy here in the slide. It is the result of an academic and professional commitment which gives it a peculiar experimental character, including the possibility it has had in accessing a broader public debate, things like tonight, which I think are also fundamental. The first concept, isotropy, same territorial conditions in all directions, has been important in structuring a series of investigations on the Venetian metropolitan area, a heavily modified cultural landscape where water management has played a major role in shaping diffuse inhabitable conditions. Besides the region's plurimillenary environmental and cultural history, the isotropic character of the urban structure and of its economic development have been underlined since the 60s by, for example, Giuseppe Samonà planning an investigation into its spatial and cultural morphology. Since then, an important body of research has highlighted the originality of a development model that was not based on concentration in big industrial and economic poles, that did not define rigid boundaries among activities. The worker could be at the same time a farmer in the fields and a worker in a workshop. That was not based on strong functional separation. It was not based on zoning, but on hybridization. This territory, as others we have investigated, showed in an ostensive way an alternative to centralized, top-down economic and political interventions, revealing individually or family-driven economies able to reframe entire regions in Europe, such as in the northern and central part of Italy, where I can tell you that wolves are still present, a lot on the Apennine, in the Alpine context or in the Flemish context. In highlighting the role of micro-infrastructures, of incremental territorial construction, we have proposed to interpret the Venetian isotropic character, often associated to chaos and lack of efficiency, as one of its territorial strengths, despite its fragile quality. Here I agree, of course, with Leo, that needs to be maintained, reinforced, exploited, and valorized. The project of isotropy is not only the reconstruction of an ideal state or a political statement, but a rational approach to the environmental, economic, and social transition as it has been explored through multiple and transcolor design hypotheses. The water and asphalt research study, in particular, investigated the capacity of diffuse territory to mitigate and adapt to climate, energetic, and socio-economic change. By integrating the reduction of energy consumption, today mainly related to individual mobility and the built fabric heat loss, with the raising of flooding and drought risks, the research has developed scenarios and spatial prototypes to evaluate the ability of a diffuse territory to function, requalify, and recycle its own space. Beyond the traditional negative judgments, these exercises show the interest of a new perspective which reveals the flexibility and the potential of such configurations, without crystallizing them into a fixed, idealized image of a decentralized Broadacre city. It refuses as well their normalization seen to occur in two main directions, towards the impossible reconstruction of village-like and close communitarian relations, or towards becoming peripheral to more selective and strategic metropolitan areas. In such explorations, we reflect on the porous character of space inside the dense micro-infrastructures covering the richer regions of northern Italy, while also including the southern regions, beset by the paralyzing concept of underdevelopment. Together with the strong armature of urban centers, the calligraphic network of secondary and dirt roads in the southern Salento region, or the dynamics of biodiversity represented in a series of maps in the regional plan we designed, was one of the themes opening to an investigation on the porosity of space. Back to the region, more recently, the themes do not seem to have fundamentally changed. A space is conceived as porous when it is permeable to different flows and connected up, when it acts as a sponge, as Bernardo Secchi was usually saying, as in the passage of a liquid through a filtering body. Porosity is the result of fractures, which can be difficult to close without imagining the opening of new life cycles, able to valorize and renew the existing porous space. Later on, we expanded the metaphor and the conceptual shift introduced by Walter Benjamin and Asia Lassis, the one of the porous city, designing new public spaces in Antwerp while at the same time building a vision for the same Antwerp and a series of strategic projects. The project of porosity is a difficult project. In a nomadic and fertile movement through disciplines and levels of reality, the reconceptualization of the city as a filtering body and as a renewable resource has given rise to concrete explorations on the transformation and adaptation of urban space based on this concept. In the Great Paris, the after Kyoto Metropolis, the study launched in 2009, porosity inspired a new gaze on the big Parisian agglomeration, but also revealed the problem of porosity, which involves the interior and the public dimension, bodies, relations, and their frictions in space. Their constant and often conflictual transformations. Porosity involves systems of values in the selection or erasure of the urban palimpsest, in the consideration of the physical, functional, and social connectivity, and the permeability of the urban realm. In 2010, at the beginning of an intensive reflection on the metropolitan space of Brussels, the hypothesis of a long-term vision for that territory was condensed down into an oxymoron. The horizontal metropolis, it is an oxymoron. This title had the ambition of synthetically solidifying the understanding of metropolitan area, whose character and characteristics, even from a simple figure ground perspective, were unequivocally different from the 19th century European big cities, such as Paris or London. The vision for Brussels 2040 evolved into the horizontal metropolis, an interpretation of the functional, cultural, and spatial character of the Brussels region, while at the same time reaching beyond the same, addressing at a more conceptual level the relation between vertically constructed territorial organizations and horizontally constructed ones. Since then, the oxymoron has fed a vast body of research and projects. Proposed as an interpretative tool And underlying the vision for Brussels Horizon 2040, it was in the subsequent work on Great Paris, we came back to Paris, that the disruptive potential of the concept of horizontal metropolis appeared to us. If Paris had been the place to elaborate design strategies for the porous city project, fundamentally recognizing the lack of porosity, the lack of permeability and connectivity of the metropolitan space, Paris could also be the paradigmatic case by which to reflect on horizontality, on the need to overcome vertical center-periphery relations, which had led in the past to the construction of a vast and highly problematic, unequal and unjust periphery. In the second phase of the Great Paris investigation, we focused on areas where marginal and peripheral characteristics were the highest, and we imagined re-establishing continuity and accessibility, taking flooding risk as an opportunity to reconceive relation between the Seine and the city. The construction of new spatial continuities to enhance the infrastructure of horizontal relations, periphery to periphery, not periphery to center, is not just a physical transformation, a geographical modification. It modifies our perception of space and places. It interacts with deeper symbolical levels. This is the case of the Trottoir du Grand Paris, the sidewalk of the Great Paris, which together with the crossings, the traversées, were proposed as complex supports to a multiplicity of scattered or fragmented actions of requalification inside the metropolis. To design a simple sidewalk between the North Station of Paris and Saint-Denis, 3 miles long, crossing infrastructural barriers and drastic modification in the social and physical landscape, seemed to us revolutionary in its simplicity. Crossing territories means crossing spatial, symbolical, political boundaries, which implies effort and motivation. It is in this crossing that territorialism, the logic of borders and partitioning, leading to the avoidance of interaction among the different agents and spatial configurations, emerges as a crucial subject in the contemporary urban space. It is in the crossing that porosity, permeability, and connectivity can be evaluated. The research study on the horizontal metropolis has been structured into 3 parts based on 3 different hypotheses, as well as realized through different research tools. In 5 different contexts, almost aligned along a parallel, from Boston metropolitan area to Hangzhou in China, going by way of Switzerland and Italy in Europe. Together with students from different schools, we explored the 2 by 2 mile space using models and axonometric drawings. My first statement concerned the existence of a tradition in the reading and interpretation of a diffuse urban conditions and extended metropolis. We have seen at the beginning with the people we were quoting, together as many other, of course. People and places, together with this tradition, join on-site interviews and drones trajectories, which connects practices and landscapes. The second part of the horizontal metropolis research has produced a large set of mappings, a series of atlases, in the conviction, and this is a second statement, that any new object of research deserves an original body of representations in order to be conceptualized and described. A few crucial themes are proposed. The fundamental one is representing the territory as an overlap of processes concerning rationality, so of rationalizations, which have structured vast territories and reshaped and invented new ecologies, mainly related to water management or to accessibility to the agricultural production or energy production. The territories that have been investigated can be seen as complex mechanism machines responsible for the degree of inhabitability of a region and today in need of adaptation and reinterpretation. Again, through the lens of territorialism, the geographies of space appropriation by different social groups are identified and mapped, showing clear cleavages and boundaries where space contributes extensively to the definition of situations of spatial injustice. Each theme is at the core of the design investigations developed in the third part of the research. The third part of the research follows, as the previous, a clear research protocol. The Broadacre city model, achieved by Frank Lloyd Wright and his students in Taliesin and exhibited at the Rockefeller Center in 1935, has been the reference. The models and the design explorations are supported by other types of representations on larger or more minute scales, and altogether they express the idea, and this is my third statement, that the transformation we are facing will not have a selective character and will not be solved by a traditional selective design approach. Working on the hypothesis of the city as a renewable resource, of space as capital and reservoir of gray embodied energy, on the reduction of energy consumptions as well as on the valorization of the heterogeneity of contemporary urban space, the research reveals the richness of such a conglomerate where the theme of coexistence probably features as the most important challenge for the future of the city and our society. No periphery, suburb or outskirts, no marginal territories, but equally livable urban conditions. This is the idea guiding the experiment. The 5 situations include 2 water-based territories, namely those of Venice and Hangzhou that you see in this image, 2 peripheries of large-scale metropolis, comprising former industrial area territories serving the city. These are still images referred to the Venice and Chinese case. This is the Boston and the Lausanne. And where the question was mainly related to the mixed condition in which different type of production and working space can be maintained and reinforced. And the 5th case is a case where geography plays a major role in shaping specific conditions where to live, an alpine valley crossed by important infrastructural bundles, and in which, again, you have to deal with this new form of urbanity, because it is a form of urbanity, and where the big infrastructures are elements that segments and fragment the space, and where you have to imagine new strategies to inhabit, to bring people to remain in these territories, and where the old military infrastructure can be rethought, for example, for new productive activities. The 5 case studies are part, although in different ways, of existing or emerging metropolitan regions. Even the Alpine Valley is practically part of the metropolitan region around the Lake of Lausanne and of Geneva. And with their problems, contradictions, and dynamics, they point out the need to define more clearly the kind of metropolitan space we want to realize or reinforce. If economists evermore recognize metropolitan areas as fundamental economic drivers on all scales, if metropolitan areas are the expression of market-driven polarization, then understanding the type of metropolis we want to achieve is primordial. And design is the tool to explore the possible new characters of such a vision. Here, there are some images that I will go through in a fluid way, related to the last effort we made during the exhibition at Beaux-Arts. We organized an international workshop, and together with students coming from different schools, we worked on 3 Belgian cases. And I think this new experience was extremely fruitful. Also, it showed how this protocol, this research protocol, was open and working with the new context, but also open to a lot of very interesting discussion that, of course, I cannot summarize here. The Horizontal Metropolis Radical Project advocates the scientific value of an investigation based on challenging many of the common ideas about good city form, about density and spatial structure. It develops a counter-project, which is historically necessary in order to unveil cultural hegemonies, to crack and fracture homogenizing tendencies. Counter-projects are intellectually and pragmatically necessary when mainstream research and approaches exclude themes that are empirically recognized as relevant. The opposition between centered and acentered configurations, relational, spatial, has inspired a large body of research in different fields, alternating peaks of interest and indifference. If vertical, hierarchical, centered relations are generally considered stable, the instability of horizontal relations in environmental organizations and in respect to supposed clear vertical relation has often been underlined, where instability means the creation of disorder and chaos. In the field of architecture and urbanism, for example, John Abraken fixes the idea that horizontal relations are volatile, unpredictable, and restless. They do not work for an environmental organization intended to sustain itself for generations. Also, Leeuwenbroek said that has never been proven. The need of stability pushes, in Abraken words, a built environment to avoid open and direct horizontal relations between live configurations. He considers this avoidance leading to simpler hierarchical structures, the single most important principle in the generation of the built environment. As you can understand here, hierarchy is naturalized as the only possible form of order, or if you prefer, the natural form of order. Nevertheless, and notwithstanding the risk of chaos, the appearance of horizontal relations, although unstable and volatile, can be observed in the inhabited environment. Our hypothesis is that concrete spatial configurations can support and enhance such horizontal relations. In long-term layered territorial constructions, for example, the abundance and the redundancy of infrastructural networks related to the basic needs of inhabitability, accessibility, water management, food production, has provided conditions that have led to diffuse, multiple, and hybrid uses of the land, supporting individual and collective empowerment down through time. The point is not only the emergence of a diffuse city, of a diffuse economic tissue, of diffuse social infrastructures, but of a space where a low hierarchical organization, modernizing the territory, has enabled individual and collective emancipation. If social sciences and economic literature have been widely debating horizontal and vertical relations, the same has not been done, with but a few exceptions, in the field of architecture and urbanism. The Horizontal Metropolis research is interested in the dissolution of the traditional counterparts in the urban field of the traditional figure of center and periphery. It reconsiders the legacy of the decentralization policies in a period, our period, of harsh selection, reduction and concentration of services, investments, opportunity. It investigates the Horizontal Metropolis and questions urbanization in the two contrasting directions of polarization and diffusion. Lastly, it addresses the question of spatial equality for human and non-human beings. The problem is not only how things are distributed in space. Distributional issues and concerns are already present in the reflection on isotropy, same condition in all directions. But here the point is on how the produced space produces and reproduces exclusion-inclusion relations. The horizontal metropolis is a vision on space, on the extended urban space, not as a producer and a reproducer of inequalities, but as a producer of emancipation. This is the topic of the research, and this is also the topic of the vision. Here I see something close to Philippe Van Parij's engagement on the universal basic income. It would be a question of posing in space and with different approaches from the past the problem of the minimum, of the base, of universality for all, and of the absence of conditions, the question of equality in space. Because the crisis of an idea, of this idea, revealed by the growing gap between rich and poor, I remember here that the last book of Bernardo Secchi was dedicated to this growing gap between rich and poor and the responsibility of urbanism and architects in designing space where injustice was absorbed inside such spaces. So if there is the crisis of the idea of equality, because it is the crisis of the conception of social justice based on redistributive mechanisms. It can be revisited in the light of the transition from an organic conception of the social body towards a society of individuals entitled to, or having the right to, an inhabitable space, vector of emancipation. It is a question of imagining a new formulation of the modern biopolitical project, for the moment constructed only in terms of biological minimum and of the unequal sharing of the risks. The words are obviously scary, equality first, but declined as proposed Pierre Rosanvallon, the term of equality, in the terms of equality relation, able to produce and make the common live, or live, I mean, produire et faire vivre, le commun, it might show its operability. The three figures of similarity, equal because we are similar, independence, equal because everyone has his or her own independence, citizenship, equal because all with the same citizen rights, are proposed by Rosanvallon to reformulate the theme of equality and democratic space. These are traditional figures which must be recontextualized and which can be open to a renewed interpretation of the urban and territorial project. The first figure, the figure of similarity, is related to the recognition of similarities of species inside a species. From the point of view of space, it forces us today to go beyond the biological simplification of the modern project, to go beyond the essential and timeless qualities of the structuralist project, to decline the anthropological, cultural, and ecological characteristics of space and of what makes it possible to include the differences in broader and more open connective fields. The public space is the place where this confrontation takes place more clearly, where the differences do not construct so many varied and fixed details, but find in loosely defined spaces the conditions of urban expression and appropriation. The second figure, that of independence, is linked to the emergence of the individual, the passage from the homo hierarchicus to the homo equalis, writes the anthropologist Louis Dumont, quoted by Rosanvallon. In an increasingly complex space, crossed by singular and heterogeneous individuals, the urban project might organize a non-marginal part of the condition of their autonomy and independence. It is in this space that the part of the rights and warranties is durably and permanently contained. Space is the stock, the place of accumulation, the capital which contains a level of freedom and autonomy, allowing each individual to express, realize, and emancipate himself or herself. There is no reason, in my opinion, to oppose the collective and common space to the space support of a society of individuals, if the full understanding of their contemporary and superimposed presence is taken into account by the project. The third figure that enlightens the theme of equality is that of citizenship. In space, it brings forward something different again, not only to maintain and introduce citizens' rights in space, but also to find and reaffirm the civic sense of the project and of any imagined transformation. For a long time considered crucial for the design of the city, the civic art, the civic design, the urban art, the Städtebau, have often lost themselves in the meanders of a non-brave and retro, nostalgic imaginary. However, they still reveal the possibility of being able to express in a given time and place the values of a society. The concept of civic magnificence that we used in some experiences, that was born or was mainly used in the Age of Enlightenment and taken up again within the reflection on the contemporary city territories, could place back at the center of the urban debate our expectations about the representation of our societal values in space, what we want and what space we want will represent our values in real and imagined spaces. To conclude, you have understood that the Horizontal Metropolis explores the functional, cultural, and spatial characters of the contemporary urban condition, but is also a vision in search of a new biopolitical project. With the figures of the discourse that I used at the beginning, porosity, isotropy, and horizontality, the intention is not to homologate differences or impose generic features, but to reflect on a set of concepts and design themes, while at the same time criticizing the narrow horizon and the limited condition within which the metropolitan urban project is today imagined. As I have already stated, the Horizontal Metropolis rests on a rich and fertile groundbed of ideas on which it can rely. It can be a tool and a shared protocol of spatial investigations, or, and as well, it is a contribution to the elaboration of a new biopolitical project. Thank you. So we are waiting for Philippe that decided to leave in this exact moment. So I profit because I wanted to do at the end, but maybe at the end there will not be time. So I want to use this moment to thank all the people that have worked on the exhibition that has been realized at Beaux-Arts, and thank you, of course, all the people that made this possible on this column, and all the people that have been concretely working together with Chiara Cavalieri, Martina Barcelloni, Michiel de Hane, Bénédicte Grosjean, Julie Leloutre, Philippe Van Parijs here. Joachim de Klerk was present in some of the seminars, and finally all these people on this part of the slide. Thank you very much. This is me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you, Paola. I must say I was both pleased to accept this invitation and terrified. Pleased for two reasons. One is that I liked your work, the part of your work which I saw in Antwerp. And two, I got to know you to some extent when our university, University of Louvain, gave you an honorary degree on the, within the framework of our year of the Utopias for our times, at the same time as the founder of Wikipedia and a Brazilian senator who is a relentless advocate of basic income, and a lovely singer of how many times must the cannonballs fly and all that. And so within that context, not only did I come to discover and like your work, but I liked you as a person as well. So I think the people who know her better than me have also learned to appreciate you as a person. That's why I was pleased. Now, at the same time, I was terrified, especially when I saw on the program for this evening that I was introduced as being a philosopher, an economist, and an architect. So can try to pretend to be a philosopher and an economist, but an architect, that's really beyond what I could do. So I'm here with some apprehension, but I'll try to do my best. It was presented as a sort of dialogue, a common reflection between us. But there is a distance between disciplines. In my experience of interdisciplinary work, there are two sort of maxims or principles which I've learned. The first thing is, don't be afraid to be naive. That is, to ask naive questions when you talk, as I'm going to do, with people from another discipline. The worst thing is to try to pretend that you understand what the other people say and even start using their jargon without really understanding it. And the other maxim, which I've always found very important, is to be concrete. That is, to try to discuss concrete examples and then to see how these particular cases can be sort of approached, illuminated from different perspectives. So, as an analytical philosopher, I start with my reflections, naive reflections on the central concepts on your approach. Then I'll go through a number of things, initiatives, local initiatives, in some of which I've been involved, and I had to go through them. I made a little list, and as a sort of examen de conscience, because I thought my intuition was that all these things I tried to help were right, but now we have these various criteria. Was I doing the right thing? So what is the mark I'm going to get from Paola Viganò for the sort of things I try to do, sometimes with success, sometimes there were failures. And you might say in some cases there were failures. Unfortunately, there were failures because they were not the right thing to do. And then I'll finish with two more brief, more general questions, including one on the connection with basic income. So first, I tried to understand as well as I could with my limited disciplinary resources, try to understand then the three central concepts of isotropy, porosity, and horizontality. So so far as I understand it, isotropy is so closely connected to hybridization in opposition to a functional separation, to a separation of the various functions. So therefore isotropy sounds something, so a city is the more isotropic, the more there is a mixity of functions in each part of the city. That's how I understood it. Two, porosity. Porosity is a matter of permeability, of sponginess. It's a metaphor used at some point, as a matter of connectivity in opposition to rigid partitioning, barriers, strong borders. That's porosity. And then horizontality is a matter of diffusion, you say, a matter of spatial equality, and is opposed to hierarchy, to polarization, to centralization, and to this opposition. It's opposed to the contrast, the strong contrast between a center and a periphery, or outskirts, or suburbs. That's how I understood the three concepts, so isotropic, porose, horizontal, and then, of course, a question that comes to mind immediately, do these three things necessarily go together? Of course, all three are matters of degree. It's not that you could say one entails the others, but is there a necessary positive correlation, or are these three things sort of the three distinctions in a way orthogonal, in the sense that you can have a city that is very isotropic but not porose at all. You can have one that is very horizontal but not isotropic, etc. So that's in a way, my first question. And you may say, well, the answer is obvious, and a number of people who followed your lessons will say that's a ridiculous question. But that's the sort of question which, for me, is important to ask in order to facilitate this dialogue across disciplines. So what is exactly, so how can we have a sort of operationalization of the three concepts in a way, so have a clear grip on each of the three concepts, and then are they analytically related, with one being logically related to the other, or are they really logically independent, and so you have a three-dimensional space, and you could locate in this three-dimensional space. Each city would correspond, if you have an indicator for each of these variables, correspond to a point. And then the question is, well, the optimal city, obviously you would like to move many cities in the direction of more porosity, more horizontality, more isotropy. Is then the ideal to be maximally isotropic, etc., in this sense? So in this three-dimensional space, should we push the cities in one of the corners, or is the optimal mix or the optimal combination something in between? Is it something for some cities in some contexts, something else for other cities? That's my first set of naive questions. Second set of questions is then about a number of concrete cases that will be familiar to quite a few people in the room. First one that came up already in Leo's introduction. What is the relationship between horizontality and verticality? Because my first, before I read your work, I thought these things were being contrasted with each other. But verticality, I mean, in the pretty literal sense of having skyscrapers and high buildings. But here the contrast is not between horizontality and verticality in this sense, it's between horizontality and hierarchy. And so one question that immediately arises is there, if you are in favor of horizontality, is there something wrong with verticality? And here my intuition, that was strengthened, I read a number of years ago this book, which must have been read by some of you, called Green Metropolis. I forgot the author, which starts by saying, what is the most eco-friendly place in the United States? Is this a commune in Oregon, in Colorado? And it says, no, it is Manhattan. And first you think, well, this must be, must be something wrong there, and then you follow the argument and you say, well, perhaps he's right, because it's living in a very compact way. Of course, you realize that you need to get the food to come all the way to Manhattan and all that, but nevertheless, all things considered, there was a point there. And so my first of these concrete questions is, when in Brussels we say, well, it's not a bad thing to densify, including by building higher, especially close to metro stations, to train stations. That's a good idea. But how does that fit with the idea of horizontality? Is it not decreasing horizontality also in your sense by creating more of a center periphery, even if there are many centers? Or is it good to have higher buildings when you sort of make a more diffuse city? For example, during the car-free day, I discovered a building I hadn't suspected existed, which is a new high residential building at the West Station. And where there is very little of that sort. It's probably a bit of a risky investment for the people who did it, but it's a way of having a more diffuse city by their building in that part of the city. But of course, much of the high building happens in a way that creates centers and peripheries. First question, concrete question. Second question, one of my successful fights with other people, next to many that failed, was, including with Eric Cohen here in the room, we argued very strongly in order to have the fourth big European school located not where all the previous European schools were, in the southeast of the city, not close where the parents of the children in the European schools were living, not where, therefore, the parents wanted it to be, not where the European Commission wanted it to be, but on the other side of the canal, right? And that worked. And so with the analysis behind it was something in the formulation, I think, from Chris Kestelot at the time. He said there is a sort of guerre larvée between the Eurocrats and the Moroccans, where the Eurocrats were pushing the Moroccans on the other side of the canal. We said we must block that because we'll end up with a big Eurocrat ghetto in the southeast of the city. So here again, is that a typical example of what horizontality means, and perhaps also to some extent what isotropy means, and so mean. So that's a second example. Third example, yes, that's another fight that was successful with our neighborhood committee. After through all sorts of tricks, we managed to get the European institutions to say explicitly that it was perfectly okay to have Horeca, to have cafes and restaurants on the ground floor of buildings that were going to rent and to use. Again, this seems to me, I thought it was very important also for various reasons in our neighborhood, including in order not to have a spread of restaurants into the residential areas. And so this seems a bit ambivalent in terms of porosity, because at the same time you can say, well, this is really trying to perforate something that otherwise would be a very rigid border. But at the same time, it was increasing the function, in a way, to some extent, the functional uniformity of the neighborhoods, because part of the motivation was to prevent the presence of restaurants in the residential area. Fourth example, and about which I feel most anxious to get a bad mark here, that is picnic the streets. So the pedestrianization of the central lanes. How does this fit? Because in a way, part of the purpose is to reinforce, to strengthen the hypercenter of our city. Of course, in a sense, to increase the porosity, because it was important, it should be there, that more important to pedestrianize that area than the Sablon or more peripheral areas, because it's a place where people, all the Brussels population, could mix and meet. But at the same time, if you stop this sort of destruction of the hypercenter by the motorway, you strengthen the center, and in a way you increase the polarization by making the center stronger. When in the context of the year of Utopias, I was asked for one utopia I could give in the urban sector at an interview, joint interview with Paul Magnette. I said Louvain-la-Neuve à Bruxelles. And what I meant by that is one thing which I found wonderful in Louvain-la-Neuve, next to bad things like not being Brussels, but one thing which I found, I was among, I and my family were among people who settled within less than 10 years after Louvain-la-Neuve was created. And in many residential, or in most residential areas in Louvain-la-Neuve, you have a different hierarchy in the use of the streets. The street is first a place where the kids can play. Secondly, it's a place where cars can be parked modestly. And thirdly, it's a place where cars can pass, can be driven in order to go where they must be parked. And when you have that hierarchy of functions of the space, you also get a different sort of relation between the people. And so you have pressure in that direction, so towards Louvain-la-Neuve à Bruxelles in this sense. For example, last night I moderated a debate between candidates for the local elections in various communes, and there was a unanimity among them in favor of Zone 30, maximum 30 kilometers per hour in all residential streets in Brussels. And that's a remarkable consensus at this stage that goes in that direction. But how, this seems to me very important for the future of our cities, but it's not so obvious to me how that fits within any of the three dimensions on which you emphasize. Sixth example, the whole one thing I remain very proud about, which is our having managed, with the courageous collaboration of one of the ministers at the time, Jos Chabert, we managed to get the cycle path on the Rue de la Loi and broadening of the pavements, reduction of the car lanes to 4, narrower than before. I still remember when there were 5 lanes with one of my sons measuring the width of it on a Sunday when no car was coming out of the tunnel.
You are an architect.
Well, I don't. It was a bit more of a cascou than an architect there because, anyway, so it happened. Many people say it will never happen. But all these things, and so, I mean, soft mobility in general, I can see how it touches laterally a number of aspects of your 3 dimensions, but it's not so obvious that this is central in it, although, of course, it must be central in it, because on the other hand, the first time I discovered your work was when you had this plan for Brussels, a completely car-free city. I thought, wow, that's radical. It encouraged me to do a number of things, including those things, but can't see now how it fits within your theoretical framework. And then I get to my 2 final examples there, which are more on the software aspect, that at first sight have nothing to do with the space, but seem to be closely related to your ideal of porous horizontal city. One of the things I'm actively involved in is something called the Mernix Plan for a Multilingual Brussels. So making all the people who grow up in Brussels trilingual plus, that is, must manage to communicate in French, Dutch, and English, and then in addition, if they are lucky enough to have another language as a native language, have it too. Now, this seems to me, so it's not immediately anything to do with architecture, but it seems to me essential for a porous city, and because porous, it's a matter of fluidity between people, and fluidity is in the first place the ability to communicate. If you don't have that, and if you have, like you have in Brussels now, 8% of the population which can't communicate either in French or in Dutch or in English, it really means that there are very strong barriers, which are not physical barriers, but which are extremely rigid. And a final example, again, not directly related to architecture or town planning. It's one of the things I spent a lot of time and energy on, was doing a national petition, was the extension of voting rights, the communal elections, from all Europeans, as required by the Maastricht Treaty, to all foreigners. And there the motivation was really that if you didn't want to have some neighborhoods where the non-Europeans were overrepresented to be neglected by the political authorities, it was essential that they should have the voting right. Even if few of them, as it turned out, use it, the sheer possibility of their having this vote was very important for then the sort of, in this case, for the horizontality as of the city as you define it, because otherwise there would be a sort of concentration of the means and the quality of life on the parts which are inhabited by the people who have citizenship or European citizenship. And of course, if the non-European part becomes significant, there would be a systematic neglect. And that holds now at the regional level, as more and more powers are transferred to the regional level, where all foreigners are deprived, are disenfranchised, and so they may, because many of the Europeans are also people who are not necessarily bureaucrats. You have lots of Polish, Romanian workers who came here, and these people will tend to be neglected if they don't have the voting rights at the relevant level. So it seems to me that, so beyond the organization of space, there is also an organization in the way of the political space that matters for the objectives that are followed. And there is a natural complementarity between these sort of actions. Then I finish with two more general questions, puzzles. One is then the connection with basic income. You say that your radical project of a horizontal metropolis aims to produce inclusion, equality, emancipation, and these are some of the terms you use that. And of course, there a convergence in terms of the objectives with what people who defend the basic income have in mind. And also because basic income is not just a redistribution of purchasing power, it's a redistribution also of bargaining power and of real freedom for the people. So there is this emancipation aspect which is very present. But my question is then, how is it exactly that isotropy, porosity, and horizontality serve these objectives? In case of isotropy, so if by isotropy is really meant the mixity of functions, I can't see any direct connection.
Distribution.
A distribution of
services in all directions, same condition in all directions.
Okay, so that means that that's useful for me. It means I misunderstood the concept of isotropy. This is how you learn, how I learn. And so it means that your concept of isotropy is much broader than the way I interpreted it. But okay, so then there may be a connection with it. Then porosity, of course, I can see if you have some degree, unavoidable degree of residential segregation between various groups, then of course porosity is important, in particular porosity through the schools, that the people within, if you have segregated neighborhoods, if all the kids go to that school without any contacts with the other, and so schools are only one of the services, it would hold for hospitals, etc., and porosity means that people get out of their neighborhood, and in that way, of course, that can help directly and indirectly equality and emancipation. And then horizontality is also not so clear to me. So, of course, part of it is the question, well, what is horizontality against? Is it the absence, it's against the presence of a unique center, but there can be a multiplicity of centers. But then, for example, if I'm going back to picnic the streets, so if you say yes, but it's not enough to have a center in Watermal-Boisfort, in Yette, and so on, but you need also a place where all the Brussels can come together. Well, this seems to be, if that's a good thing for the feeling of a common identity, it seems to jar or to be in tension with horizontality. But perhaps not, because perhaps I misunderstood the concept. And finally, my final question is then really zooming out in a way. So there is, to phrase it in very simple terms, there seems to be a tension between then the radical project of having horizontal cities and the very powerful trend towards or away from horizontal countries or horizontal regions. What I mean by that is I'm struck, and you and other people in the room know the demographics of Europe and of the world better than me, but I was, for example, absolutely amazed by seeing the projections for the land of Brandenburg in Germany, the demographic projection. You could see that within the next 15 years or so, I saw the figures a couple of years ago, the prediction was that every single commune in the whole land was going to lose population, except for Potsdam, which is stuck to Berlin, and the land of Brandenburg around Berlin. So you have then, however horizontal you try to make Berlin, there is this very powerful trend that is not limited to Germany. We have that, I had recently more examples about some parts of Wallonia that keep losing their population. Very powerful trend towards more and more concentration in the metropolitan areas. This trend may be strange because you think with the internet and all that, the location of economic activities and therefore of residences will matter less and less. And on the contrary, what we see throughout North America, throughout Europe, and also in Europe it means the emptying of some countries, Hungary that keeps losing population, Bulgaria that keeps losing population. You have that also transnationally, but also within each country. And there are many factors behind that. One of them, I just mentioned that in passing, of course there are many of them. One of them is simply women's participation in the labor market. You may say, well, that's really unconnected as well. What happens is that if you have a couple with two professionals, people with high skills, what's the chance that they will both find a satisfying job in the same small town? Very small. The chance that they'll both find a job in a much bigger city or a metropolis is much higher. But the presence of these skilled people is then, of course, also the source of further employment for more people. And so something that at first sight is of a completely different order, like labor market participation, labor market, has a massive impact then on the use of space and the structuring of space. And one of the implications seems to be this extremely powerful trend towards what would be then the non-horizontality of regions and continents, countries as a whole. And so, therefore, the question is, well, is your radical project limited then to these increasingly centralized centers? Of course, some examples were not of that sort there. Or is your radical project also to fight and to try to reverse this trend? So these are a few of my naive philosophical questions, totally non-architect questions to you.
Thank you. I think that we would need a lot of time to enter in all this very interesting reflection, and I would say that apart from the understanding of isotropy as only mixing, on the contrary, considering that isotropy is related to territories in where you can find similar conditions in all the different parts. So in fact, is the idea of a territory in which the investment that has been placed in the space is similar in all their parts. And in that sense, they offer the same possibilities for those that are there. In fact, I share a lot of the things, and I appreciate a lot all the things you have been saying. But I think that maybe it's more interesting. I don't know, where is Roxanne? Where is Roxanne? Gone. Was to maybe to open to the public and maybe to add other questions, and then we will see if there are answers, or this is just a way for me and for you, I hope, to continue to reflect on such. The only thing I would like to clarify is that if your things, your experiences are not fitting into this abstract scheme, it's not really a problem. We take the scheme and we start from scratch again. So it's not an idea that everything has to find a position inside the kind of dogmatic order. There's nothing to do with this. These three figures that I see in my experience as being a kind of trilogy, they have not a necessity to stay together, although they are in a way like accompanying in trying to reconfigure the urban project. I think that we have to reconfigure them. In fact, after the modern project, we have been living a little bit with looking for some possible directions, but never trying to reformulate. And also, in a way, we were losing some part of the interesting tension that was inside the modern project. The tension, for example, towards a progressive emancipation, no? Which is something that is not present always in the projects we are realizing today. In fact, many movements, many dynamics are going in the opposite direction. So I think it's also interesting to restate the need of a project, the need of taking care of through the project for us is a spatial project, for you is more a political and social construction, which is also, of course, in our case, but in space, finding the possibility of reframing the theme of emancipation, of amelioration of the condition of life, of inhabitability in space. That's the thing, I think, that is urgent for us to reestablish. But I think that could be nice to...
Good evening. Thank you, Paola, for your explanation. It's sometimes hard to follow, even that I understood some of it before and I've seen you presenting it in other occasions. I was wondering if you could share with us some of your experiences, how this horizontal metropole or Metropolis approach has helped you also to address, for example, the local political level, because you frame it in search of a biopolitical project. And how is this also, aside from the contextualization or the problematization of a territory and academic conceptualization, how is also instrumental to address local politics and to bring them to other kinds of solutions? Because I think this is also where I hope this approach can be really instrumental.
But I think that there are much more situations where the problem of horizontality, as I would frame it, becomes very, very evident. And we can say that the condition of lack of balance among territories is very frequent. You can have different reasons, because you are on one side of the frontier, or on the other side, because the politics related to work or to housing are differently managed, because there are different intentions, because there are traditionally marginal territories, and each time you try to reintegrate them inside a broader view, where the process of metropolization might be instrumental. I'm not against the metropolization. Metropolization is happening. It's true. The metropolitan condition is today extremely strong, and I was quoting economists say that, in fact, the economic drivers of the planet are the metropolitan areas. But exactly because of this, why don't we use them to reconstruct a different balance or different relations among territories? Why certain territories could not profit of this? Take an example. Why Wallonia should not profit of the metropolization of Brussels? Not in the sense of suburbanization of Brussels, but in the sense of metropolization. I mean, the metropolitan condition, not becoming a periphery of, not becoming the suburb of, but in the idea of profiting of the good dynamic in Brussels, that is in fact recovering more attractivity, etc. And why we don't use those dynamics to reconsider the relation between Brussels and Wallonie, for example? There are parts of the Wallonia that are very, very close to where the wealth is produced. Why they should remain completely disconnected by this process, for example? Why don't we use spatial strategies, not only about accessibility and easier mobility, but also related to type of activities, to reframe the localization of certain equipments, why don't we don't profit of the fact there are very, very easy situations where you can easily strengthen relations that might contribute to change certain old problems of the Wallonian side, for example. The question of the verticality of the city, so the idea of strong densification inside the cities. This is a strategy, but is it the only strategies? Are we really imagining that we are only concentrating in certain areas? That the concentration will become the next solution for all the problems of the city? Are we dismantling the investment that we have been realizing? That's my question for the Vlasbaum method that is still here. No? Where are you dislocating the people that you want to move from the actual suburbs or sprawling areas? Do you think really to put all of them in the center of the city, or or only in the center of the villages, or only? Why don't we imagine that on top of it? Of course, we have to restructure them. Of course, there will be some parts that will not resist, will not be useful for the future. But why we consider all that completely a waste? A waste. Now, I think is something. Sorry. I don't know if it is an answer to Ward.
I would like to answer to two things that you said. First, I heard that CDH in Wallonie has a proposal to activate 55,000 hectares of car-based green fields for housing. And I mean, as long as they go away from the problematic sanitation of cities, they will always lose the opportunity to connect to the qualities that a metropolitan central network could give to all the levels of their housing. I mean, spatial verticality could be combined with opportunity horizontality, that we can distribute opportunities. And it is almost the same logic behind this idea: how can we slowly transform? First of all, never relocate people. Make them do it themselves, make them want it, by giving them more opportunities, more equality on other places. We see today that sprawl is losing its real estate value faster than any other location. We have big villas in the middle of nowhere who lost 60% of their real estate value, who will never be able to sell and to compensate if they don't pay back the mortgage damage of the banks. We see that obesitas, burnout, divorce rates, everything in these areas where people are so long in traffic to go to work are killing also the quality of their life. That the elderly care, when you become a widow or a widower at the age of 55, you might stay 30 years because we live longer than ever before in a place where elderly care cannot reach it anymore. So we see that the Arcadia of suburbia is not as good as was promised. And I think that your question, where will you create opportunities? I think they have to be able to choose between a rural quality, densified village, which will be surrounded finally by the countryside again, instead of being surrounded by more sprawl, by small towns, medium towns, and big towns. That the opportunities, and today the opportunity of choice is wrong because the speculation of land value is added up to the plus value on the real estate buildings themselves. And because the fact that the ownership of land is not taken out of any kind of promoting real estate process, the cost of housing in urban areas is rising a lot faster than the inflation. So they go to suburbia because it's the only thing they can afford, because their car is paid by taxes. And so that's the reason. I think we agree completely on how to go.
The problem will be when you will imagine that you can expand the village, for example, and around the village you have the most fertile land of the region. In that moment you will have to choose or to densify the village or to maintain the productivity of the land. And this paradox will be more and more frequent. So in that sense, I think that the urbanized areas can be the basis, the support for this work of reinventing and reestablishing a better place where to live. I want to go back, a moment to the question of Philippe about the hierarchy we're saying of streets, pedestrian streets in respect to other streets. The point is that this is not hierarchy. This is giving a different role to the different spaces. It's not a problem of hierarchy. It's an articulation of space. Space is not always the same, and it's normal to imagine that there will be street with certain characters, street with other characters. This is not a problem of hierarchy. We sometimes confuse the idea of hierarchy that is related to power with the idea of articulation of space. And in that sense, it's perfect to have a pedestrian street in Brussels, and that Brussels will be more attractive. But of course, it could be very interesting to have the same pedestrianization also in other parts. That's why we launched the idea of more radical no-car scenarios, where all the metropolitan area of Brussels was imagined without cars, and in reconquering the space for different uses, for a different way of living. So it's important.
So on these two issues, so if I understand you properly, so here it's isotropy that plays its role, that you say, well, it's very important that you should have these sort of functions, these sort of possibilities, opportunities should not be limited to a particular...
I want to say that the isotropy project was really the project of decentralization. Yeah. Europe has been working for decades on the idea of centralization, especially after the war, but also before the war. And then now we start to say that this is all wrong. Yeah. And we want to cut, because that's the main point. Cut expenses, not invest, not maintain. Then you have sometimes tragedies because you don't maintain the infrastructures.
But then on the other issue on which there might be a disagreement is, so if I understand you properly, so about the connection between horizontality in your sense and then spatial verticality in the sense of concentration in some areas and building higher. If I understand your response to that, you say, well, your objection is not that this is incompatible with horizontality, but it's not the only solution to our problems. But it's not by definition that horizontality in your sense excludes verticality in the sense of concentrating in certain areas. You are just saying, well, this is not the only strategy forward in order to achieve you.
I think what we should, because there is a tendency, and of course the Baumesters are in the first line on this, not the densification, but densification in any situation, in all conditions, whatever you're losing for this densification, are we really in favor of indiscriminate densification? I don't think so. So in any case, there will be some densifications, maybe the one you were describing around the station, the node, of course, this is something that has been already made. So it's not a novelty in any case, but this will not be the solution. And at a certain moment, we will have to choose or to close one green space that is inside the city, because we want to densify it, or to maintain it, because we think that this is important, even if some theories that have not been proven neither think that by making this compact, this will be more sustainable. But you are renouncing to something that is maybe more important and giving more sustainability to the urban space in general. So this kind of paradoxes and moment of choices will be more and more frequent. So I think it's important also to elaborate some positions in order to be ready finally to choose and not just choose one by one or following certain pressures, because then it becomes much more ambiguous and non-transparent, for example.
Hello, I'm Christian Boret, the Bouwmeester of Brussels, a very dense city, and densification is my daily work. But I would like to change perhaps the emphasis, because I think in this debate about being selective, how we could get something that is sustainable between horizontal and vertical. I think it's about selectivity that we cannot avoid. But I liked very much the confusion in the interpretation of isotropy by Philippe van Parijs, who considered it as mixity. Because mixity is very crucial to me as part of the definition of urbanity. And so urbanity of being in a metropolitan condition is being exposed to what is different, sharing or being forced to share because you cannot avoid, while in low density areas you can avoid, you can continue to act in an individualistic way. And so this mixity is, or you were talking about, that's the question I want to ask, emancipation. It seemed as if emancipation today is more probable in horizontal territories than in vertical territories. While for me, it's still Stadt, Luft macht frei. So the city air makes you cough today, but it also makes you free. So what about that? What kind of emancipation do you think about that is only possible through horizontality? Because I think emancipation is linked to metropolism.
This is why I was saying that metropolization can be also a potential, can be an occasion, especially if you imagine to extend this condition to territories that are very close, but they are not really part, they are not sharing this richness. At the same time, I was using the depth of the investigation on the diffuse context, for example, of Italy or Flanders, to remember that in those territories, a specific emancipation was possible, where in one generation from very poor population, you get to population that can reach a level of life and a possibility of education for their sons, for the new generation that would never been possible without this process, the process that constructed, for example, the small medium enterprises in those regions. This is an historic effect, and it has been studied by economists, by historians about this transition without fractures, the effect of becoming richer, having better conditions of life for your family, thanks to a territory that was giving you a certain amount of supports, infrastructural supports, and space to develop your own activity. This has been history. I'm not saying that now we have to remake it the same. I'm just saying that in a certain period, those territories have been territories of emancipation. This cannot be denied.
Yeah, it's wealth production, production of wealth that entails the possibility of emancipation. Flanders suburban sprawl is very rich now. There is a full possibility of emancipation, but you could question if horizontal sprawl is stimulating it more than traditional city and city, so the concentrated.
No, but you're right, Christian, absolutely. I'm not talking of the certain forms of sprawl that you are targeting, and also Leo. I'm talking of something more complex that has been confused for a lot of time with the typical sprawl, but in fact was a different phenomenon. And inside this sprawl, hybridization, as I was saying, so the mixed use was fundamental, the multifunctionality of everything. As I was saying, the worker that was a farmer and the worker in the workshop. So this which is something for me very interesting because it goes back to sort of anarchic tradition. Kropotkin, no, I mean, you are thinking that, in fact, that utopia was real in that period, in those territories. But this has nothing to do with the typical suburban, monofunctional neighborhood, nothing.
Okay, maybe one last question before we end. So where okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the very interesting debate that was offered to us this evening. Actually, I have a very simple question, which is, while listening to all these plans and visions of the world, I like to think, how are we going to get there? I mean, what is the question of, where is the question of agency? Who and how are we going to get anywhere else than where we are stuck at the moment? And then I wanted to refer it back to, on one hand, one of the examples that Paola Viganò was mentioning about the northern part of Paris. So this trottoir, this walkway of 4 kilometers long. And then I was thinking, who the hell is going to start doing that? Who is going to invest on that? Are the inhabitants of these areas going to start placing the first stone? Is it going to be a crowdfunding being organized? Is it manu militari through the Grand Paris that this walkway is going to be built? Who is going to invest this incredible amount of money for what? Because actually, when we are talking about these obstacles generated by infrastructure, are on the very advantage of the users of the big cities who are living outside the city, again, and not just in terms of commuting, but also in terms of services or in terms of goods, traffic goods, so on and so forth. So the very obstacles we are trying to bypass are the infrastructure that make possible for this social contract to work. And then the second part of the question was, okay, but maybe when we are talking about this horizontal metropolis, and there is a very important question in all the images that were shown here. It looks as if we are moving effortlessly as territories where kind of, to come back to this idea of the isotropy, that we could move in every direction effortlessly, when it's absolutely not the case. I mean, we need, again, a big series, a huge series of infrastructure and a network of utilities in order for these territories to work as they do. And all this, as the Bouwmeester of Flanders was mentioning, all this costs money. So there is a social contract that is implicit to the maintenance of the way we live now. So the question, again, is, shouldn't we address the way we want to go on with the territory? And address fundamentally the question of who and how we are going to start operate this transformation. Because, I mean, to me, in this debate, this is the big absence. We keep on projecting very interesting fundamental visions of how to move on together. But we are not thinking about how to operationalize, instrumentalize, involve, engage the very actors of this social contract. Thank you.
Thank you for this. You are right, and of course this is not the solution of of the problems of the world. It's just an attempt that we can do in the position in which we are, and the position in which we are is the one of being architects, urbanists, professors, teaching. In all conditions, in all situations, the scope is to open a debate on this. The Trottoir du Grand Paris will not be realized because, of course, it's not crossing with the actual dynamics that are in Paris, ejecting population and transforming even the northern part in a gentrified part of Paris, where, in fact, those populations will be simply pushed a little bit more far than where they are now. The political conditions are clearly beyond our work, but I revindicate to our work also political meaning. So the things we are saying have a political meaning. They are not nonsense politically, but we are not politicians. We try to connect to our capacity to imagine space, to work on space, to understand, to read space. We can make a piece of this, not more than that. I think we should also maintain a certain modesty that this is what we are. Then, of course, in a debate, by opening this type of reflection, which maybe you can consider them a little bit academic, but I think that is the good part of academy, is the freedom you have being an academic subject, that you can work on things that are probably not considered as essential in this moment. If you look at what is happening in the territories today, but not only here, not only in Brussels, but you look a little bit around, it's amazing the enormous transformation that metropolitan areas, and not only metropolitan areas, are going through. And the intellectual debate on this is almost zero. We can work a little bit on the idea of the sustainable development. On this we are trying to find some elements, fundamentally recipes that we want to apply in all the different situations the same. So I think there is a lot to revise, and the agents or the agency of such ideas, I think if ideas have some strength, that they will go on. I would say that. Ideas are stronger than us. So you just formulate them, and then we see if they can run.
On the same line, I would like to return to the context in which I first met Paola, which was this idea of utopias. And I just published a book about the future of Belgium, and with as a title, Belgium, une utopie pour notre temps, une utopie voor onze tijd. And the prologue to the French version is called L'utopie fait la force. We have a national motto which says L'union fait la force, l'utopie fait la force. And I really believe in that. That is what you need. You need a vision which not only gives you a sense of direction, it also gives you the strength to struggle, because it gives you hope in having a city, a living environment in this case, but also more generally a society, a world, and that is really worth living in, and that will be better for the next generation than for us. But of course, these utopias must not be sheer dreams and sort of completely disconnected from reality. Hence the immense importance of having this sort of debate, this sort of reflection, including interdisciplinary, and to clarify concept. Isotropy was a connection with mixity of functions, mixity of people. Does horizontality really mean sprawling, etc.? There is some conceptual clarification, but also contributions from the various disciplines. And then people bottom up can really help in changing things. And the example in Antwerp of Ringland is a great example. So more modest examples like the Picnic the Streets action is another example, because what you need is really actions where people can mobilize. They mobilize in the right way, using instruments that are strong enough but not too strong, but above all guided by a vision, a coherent vision for the future. And that's why work like yours and discussions like these are really so important, not in order to sort of just realize that there are all sorts of constraints about what we do. We must realize that there are these constraints, but this must not force us to abandon our hopes. But these hopes must be made concrete by having these radical programs, these radical projects, these utopias. And so that's why I find your work and the work of the people around you, and the controversies with the local bouwmeesters, so important. So thank you on my behalf, and no doubt on behalf of many people of the room, for all the things you did.
This fantastic occasion. Thank you.